let's get straight to the point. There is something you have carried with you for as long as you can remember. Something that whispers to you when you turn off the light and tells you that everything you believe about yourself is nothing more than a fragile story. It's not your conscience. It's not your reason. It's that dark voice, silenced for years, that knows who you really are. And if you think you can ignore it, let me warn you about something no one ever told you. That shadow doesn't dissolve with your efforts to be right, nor with your gestures of false humility. It stalks you. It studies you. It patiently waits for the moment you run out of excuses to tear down the facade and face your true reflection. Tell me, what would you do if you discovered that everything you defend about yourself is a fiction woven to protect you from the panic of looking inward? Maybe you think you control your identity, that your achievements, your titles, your reputation are irrefutable proof that you are someone solid. But what if I told you that all of that is nothing more than a poorly glued mask on a face you don't want to see? What if I revealed to you that growing, according to Jung, doesn't mean polishing your mask, but betraying it, breaking it with your own hands, and allowing your shadow to invade your consciousness with its brutal truth? Think about it for a moment. You have spent entire years feeding a limited idea of yourself, convinced that if you kept that mold intact, one day you would be invulnerable. Do you dare to admit that this mold is exactly what suffocates you? Maybe right now you feel a shiver in your chest, as if something inside you knows this moment is more dangerous than any external failure. Because when you decide to look at your shadow, there is no turning back. No one talks about this out loud. No one admits that to reach true inner power, you first have to betray yourself. Not betray your essence, but that caricature of perfection with which you shield yourself from the void. Look honestly at the part of you that you despise, the one you repress because you fear it will destroy your character. The part that envies, that lies, that fantasizes about imposing itself. The part that doesn't fit into your story of virtue. Do you know what happens if you don't integrate it? It becomes an enemy that sabotages every attempt you make to grow. That shadow doesn't disappear if you ignore it. It grows stronger in the darkness of your unconscious. And the more you insist on appearing impeccable, the more power you give it. They sold you the idea that success is a pedestal, that you will only reach it if you keep your image intact. No one told you that true success is not born from protecting a fixed identity, but from being brave enough to demolish it. Why do you think most people fail at this task? Because looking straight at what you hide forces you to go through a mourning for your old self. A symbolic death. A surrender of everything you believed was non-negotiable. And that process, that painful passage, is the only path to individuation. Jung wrote it with surgical precision. The one who looks outward dreams. The one who looks inward awakens. But awakening is not a pretty metaphor. It's an inner cataclysm. Now tell me, are you willing to let your old self die? Or do you prefer to keep holding the fantasy that keeps you trapped in a mediocre life? Because you can't have both. You can't conquer your inner power while clinging to the image that makes you feel safe. This is the point most avoid. Deep self-knowledge is not an intellectual exercise. It is an act of absolute courage. It means looking at your darkness and recognizing that you yourself are the greatest obstacle in your path. Look at your trajectory. Every time you have been on the verge of a real change, something inside you has whispered that it was too risky, that maybe you would lose everything if you abandoned your character. That voice that insists you must keep being who you've always been. Do you know what those who have crossed this threshold call it? Resistance. It is the last defense of your dying ego. It is the guardian of the prison where you confine yourself. And you will only be able to cross that border if you understand that your shadow is not a monster, but half of your truth. If you keep trying to be impeccable, if you continue feeding the illusion of your perfection, you will remain chained. You will believe you are advancing because you collect superficial achievements, but inside you will remain fragmented, weak, afraid of your own complexity. Inner growth demands that you betray all that you destroy it, that you allow yourself to stop being the hero of your own fable and finally become a whole human being. And that betrayal is the seed of your freedom. So listen carefully to this question, because it will be the most uncomfortable one you hear in a long time. To whom do you owe loyalty? To your old self? Or to the truth that calls you from your shadow? Because you can only choose one. If you decide to keep defending your sugar-coated version, you condemn yourself to a life in which every step will be a pathetic attempt to sustain the unsustainable. But if you dare to betray that image, if you accept your darkness and integrate it, then you will have begun the only journey worth taking, the one to become who you are destined to be. No one can do it for you. No one will give you the map of your own psyche. You will have to venture into the unknown territory of your unconscious and sit face to face with the parts you fear the most. There you will discover that your anger, your envy, your need for control are not diseases to eradicate, but fragments of misdirected energy. If you learn to recognize them, they cease to be your jailers and become your fuel. Most people never reach this point. They prefer the comfort of a false identity rather than the uncertainty of transformation. Yet, that uncertainty is the only door to inner power. Do you wonder why so many feel empty, even though they have everything? Because they have built their lives on a limited self that never had authentic roots. They have rejected their shadow and with it have renounced their true strength. Today, you can keep walking around with that disguise, convinced that someday it will become your skin. Or you can recognize that it is an old rag that no longer protects you from anything. This moment, this very instant when you feel something inside you trembling, is your opportunity. The opportunity to look at yourself without filters and decide that enough is enough, that you will no longer be the guardian of your own prison. Because in the end, it all comes down to this. Will you choose loyalty to a dead image or the risk of being authentic? Will you keep living under the control of a character, or will you dare to fully integrate yourself? Betraying your old self is not a defeat. It is the most radical act of freedom a human being can experience. When you dare to betray your mask, you become a whole individual. And no one, absolutely no one, can take that power away from you. And if you think you've understood the essential up to this point, let me tell you that you have only scratched the surface. Because integrating your shadow and betraying your old self is just the beginning of a much deeper and more disturbing process. The dissolution of all the idealized images you have fabricated about your worth. Yes, you may have already sensed that behind your character there is nothing solid, but what you may not suspect is that your internal idols, those archetypes of perfection you repeated like a mantra, are actually the most insidious bars of your prison. How many times have you fantasized about becoming that polished, radiant version that, according to you, would save you from your insecurities? How many years have you invested in projecting an unquestionable figure of success, intelligence, or kindness, believing that if one day you managed to fit into that imaginary silhouette, your pain would disappear? And now, I want you to take a deep breath before hearing this. There is no perfect identity that will come to rescue you. No bright future will absolve you from the task of recognizing yourself in your entirety, with your dark zones and your light, with your contradictions and your most primitive fears. It's curious, isn't it? The more you obsess over being perfect, the farther you are from your authentic power. And this is a nuance almost no one dares to explore. Because admitting it means recognizing that your need for perfection is, deep down, a desperate attempt to cover your own shame. Every time you tell yourself that you should be something more successful, more virtuous, more consistent, you are turning your back on your humanity. You are declaring that as you are, in your raw state, you are not worthy of existing. And as long as you keep feeding that myth, no matter how much security you appear to have, you will continue living with a terrible fear that they will discover you are not the image you sell. This is what Carl Jung understood as a much more radical betrayal than any external decision, because it's not just about abandoning the old version of yourself, but about giving up the delusion that you will ever be perfect. It means looking at your shadow and recognizing that you don't need to eliminate it to deserve respect, that your strength doesn't depend on becoming an immaculate being. On the contrary, your strength grows when you stop defending your facade and dare to say, without shame, "This is me, with my dark parts included." Do you sense it? True liberation comes when you understand that authenticity weighs more than any imaginary medal you long to hang on your chest. And why is this step so threatening? Because demolishing your idealized images leaves you without excuses. As long as you believe you lack a little more discipline or something else talent, you can indefinitely postpone confronting your truth. It's comfortable, in a way. You can tell yourself the story that someday, when everything is perfect, you will have permission to live without fear. But that day never comes. Never. Because it doesn't exist. The only moment when you can be free is when you accept your human condition. Imperfect, contradictory, and chaotic. Allow me to ask you an uncomfortable question. What would you gain if you stopped trying to prove your worth all the time? What space would open in your life if you gave up that compulsion to fit into the success image others sold you? Maybe right now you can't imagine it because you have been holding on to that character for too long. But the moment you let go of the need to be perfect, something unexpected happens. Calm appears. An inner silence arises that doesn't depend on others' judgment, approval, or any external stage. That silence is the antechamber of your real power. Most people never experience it. They prefer the constant noise of their own self-demand because that way they can tell themselves, "At least I'm trying to improve." But what they don't see is that that perpetual effort is the most refined mechanism of self-hatred, the perfect trap. You keep waging war against yourself, and so you justify your chronic anxiety. Because if you accepted your humanity as it is, what would you do with all that time and energy you now spend hating yourself? And here is where the concept of internal transformation takes on a much deeper meaning. It is not enough to integrate your shadow. You must also abandon the belief that you will ever be a finished, perfect person worthy of eternal applause. The individuation Jung spoke of is not reaching a final state of perfection. It is an infinite process of discovery and reconciliation. It is the daily decision to exile no part of yourself. It is looking at every aspect of your psyche, your desire for control, your fear of rejection, your thirst for recognition, and saying, "This is also mine." Right now, something inside you may protest. Your mind might want to cling to the promise that if you keep trying a little harder, someday you will become an unreachable, admired, unquestionable being. But that fantasy is nothing but an emotional narcotic. It numbs you and keeps you still. The reality is you don't need to be immaculate to have worth. You don't need to meet any prior conditions to start living with purpose. In fact, the sooner you give up that impossible demand, the sooner you will begin to feel your own power. Because true success, the kind that doesn't waver with every criticism nor crumble with every mistake, only comes from this decision: to let go of the image of perfection and embrace your complexity with full awareness. Do you understand now? It's not a simple exercise in self-esteem. It's an internal revolution, one that requires you to die symbolically every day to the illusion that your worth depends on something external, to finally bury the myth that others' recognition can give you the peace you deny yourself. Listen carefully. Your inner power is not measured by the shine of your achievements, but by your ability to stand firm when your ego is in ruins. Only when you stop identifying with your idealized images can you experience the deepest freedom. The freedom to act without fear of losing approval, without the urgency to prove anything, without the anxiety of seeming invulnerable. The freedom to be human, unapologetically. And if right now you feel dizzy, it's because you are on the verge of a discovery that will forever change the way you see yourself. The question is, will you retreat to the warm comfort of your fantasies, or will you dare to cross that threshold and discover what lies behind the mask? Only you can choose. No one will come to tear it off for you. No one can do it. Because the last chain that holds you is not the gaze of others, nor your circumstances, nor your past failures. The last chain is the belief that you need to be more than what you already are. When you understand that, everything will begin. When you stop running from yourself, your authentic power will start. And now that we've made it this far, before we continue, I want to present the following to you. Our book, The Formula of Awakening, is now available. Do you feel like there's something inside you that wants to awaken, but you don't know where to start? Then I invite you to transform your way of thinking, and with it, your way of living. Discover who you can become. Start today. The link to get the ebook is in the first pinned comment of this video. Grab your copy now at a great price. With that said, let's continue with the video. And if you're still here, if you've resisted the temptation to close this video and take refuge in your old certainties, it's because something inside you is cracking. A voice you didn't want to hear begins to rise above all your justifications. And that voice doesn't ask for permission. It demands that you wake up. Do you know why? Because you've been living too long like an actor trapped in the same act of a mediocre play you didn't even write. A performance so predictable that anyone could guess your next move. But tell me honestly, aren't you exhausted from always playing the same character? Don't you feel a kind of intimate disgust seeing yourself repeat again and again the same dialogues you swore to abandon? Most never reach this point. They leave before the silence becomes unbearable. Because when you silence the noise of your mask, you hear for the first time what your shadow has to tell you. And what it says is devastating and glorious at the same time. Everything you feared to accept is exactly what makes you a whole human being. You are not only your light, your talent, or your kind side. You are also your fragility, your obsession with controlling everything, your jealousy, and your unconfessable desires. You are the sum of contradictions that have mixed for years in your unconscious. And only by integrating that amalgam can you claim your power. Listen well, because I will not repeat this again. If you truly want to live a life worth living, You have to stop begging for permission to be who you are. There is no more time to lose. Every day you postpone this internal transformation, you feed that old self that prefers to chain you to a withered identity rather than risk growing. But that self is doomed to die sooner or later. The question is whether you will have the courage to hasten its end by your own will. Maybe right now your heart beats a little faster, as if sensing you are about to make an irreversible decision. Don't ignore it, because this is the unmistakable sign that you are truly alive. And if you have come this far, I'm going to tell you something I won't say to everyone. Inside you is a power so immense, you don't even need to embellish it with grand gestures. You don't have to prove it. You just have to inhabit it. And to do so, you will have to betray everything you thought was immutable. Here is the most disconcerting irony of all. The more you refuse to change, the deeper you sink into the void you pretend not to feel. But the moment you decide to break your old image and embrace your shadow, the entire inner universe you have been suffocating becomes your greatest ally. Then you no longer act out of fear of failure or compulsion to please everyone. You act because you understand that real life begins exactly in the territory that terrifies you the most. So before you go, I want you to ask yourself this question without tricks. Will you keep choosing the comfort of your character or the vertigo of being yourself? Will you keep waiting to be recognized someday as perfect? Or will you start living without waiting for any permission? Because if you dare to cross this threshold, if you decide to look at your shadow with clear eyes, you will discover that there is no greater victory than feeling whole without needing anyone's validation. And that moment will be the beginning of everything you have always dreamed of experiencing. An authentic life, fiercely free, without explanations or masks. If all this has stirred something inside you, if right now you feel that mix of vertigo and clarity that almost makes you tremble, I want to propose a small challenge. Write down here in the comments the phrase, "I renounce my mask," so I know you are part of this minority that refuses to settle for mediocrity disguised as success. And if you want this to be just the beginning of our journey, subscribe to the channel, because here you won't find typical motivational talk, but the raw truth no one dares to tell you. And now I say goodbye with something you probably didn't expect to hear. I hope this video has been an irreversible crack in your character. I hope that crack widens every time you try to return to your old comfort. I hope that, even if you want to, you can no longer forget who you really are. Because if you reach the point where your mask no longer fits your face, that will be the toughest and the most glorious day of your life. See you soon. We'll meet in the shadow.